So, hello students. I am taking a little bit of time here to just record some tips on writing that I've found useful for myself, and I still use them when I write, but also that I think I've worked on with students over the past several years to help them to identify what are the elements that they need to focus on in the writing to have it be effective and clear, concise. Um, and as you work on essay two, or other essays that require evidence and history, these will be some tips that will give you sort of the insider's guide. So I'm going to do a screen share now and go over these with you very briefly. And when you're done with this, please also have a look at the two examples that I put up on Moodle of students' papers who received very high grades on the essay one for History 116. So you can see how they did that and how they applied the rules I'm going to talk about today. Okay, so first and foremost, an essay has three components. No matter what the essay is, it needs to have an introduction, a paragraph or paragraphs, and a very short conclusion. The conclusion, I think, it's very simple, and you're trying to sort of just sum up what you've already said very briefly. It can be as little as 2 sentences, so I'm not going to go over that today, but I'm going to talk about the other elements very briefly. So the essay begins with an introduction. And this is very important. Some students don't realize they have to have a separate paragraph that does these things, but it's very important. To begin the introduction, one way to do this that is very effective is to have an introductory sentence. This is what allows you to sort of bring in your reader from wherever they're thinking about or what they're thinking about or wherever they are. I sometimes tell them to bring, the reader out of the ether and into towards their topic. So this is a place where you establish some context and you sort of get their attention. In journalism, this is called a hook, but in history, you don't always have to have a hook because we're not necessarily trying to wow the reader. But anyway, this is the place where you bring the reader towards your topic. You can have a few more sentences, but I think a good introduction should not have, for a paper in our class, they're pretty short, more than 4 or 5 sentences total. And I want to emphasize that you need to have a thesis statement, which is a thesis statement is where you make your argument that responds to the essay prompt. So this is not it's an open-ended approach, but you do need to be thinking about responding to the actual prompt that's on the syllabus. So you are going to formulate an argument that is your own, this is your chance to make your argument. So do that in your thesis, make it clear. It needs to be broad enough to cover the whole essay. So that means that there are, you'll probably go through several different pieces, right? As you write the essay. But they all need to fit within your thesis, not part of, but the whole thesis should cover the whole essay. But it also has to have at the same time a flip side that is also very specific. It needs to be debatable and be specific. So I'll show you some examples on the Moodle essays that I'm going to post, but it needs to be something that can be debatable. So it cannot be, people at all times, are hungry, or something that is sort of too vague and broad to be meaningful. So keep that in mind as well. I encourage students to follow their thesis with a roadmap. Some students are able, when they write very well, to incorporate the roadmap in the thesis, but I think it's not worth working on that skill if you don't have it. It's just fine to create another sentence in which you lay out your roadmap. This is a place where you list the things or categories you're going to examine in the essay as you make your argument. So thinking of it as a way to sort of give us an idea of where you're going to go in the essay with some of these important sort of sightseeing spots along the way. And I tell students to think about this as also a way to organize their paragraph. You can organize each paragraph can basically be one of these elements for your roadmap on these short essays. As essays get longer, you'll need to have a roadmap that is a bit that allows you'd have several paragraphs fit in these categories. You won't be able to list all of them, right? But for our class and for the short essays you're doing in this class, it's very fine to just list those categories or themes and then to align those with your paragraphs. So now to the paragraphs. So paragraphs begin with a topic sentence argument. As you become, amazing writers, you won't necessarily need to have it be your first sentence, but mostly, even writers like myself who do this for a living, do use this as our first sentence. This is where you lay out very clearly your argument that you will make in the paragraph. This argument needs to be clearly tied to the thesis. And so it needs to be an argument that is, again, directly engaging with the topic of the thesis and that argument. And it also needs to be previewed on, at least I recommend that you preview it on the roadmap before, so we can clearly see from the thesis to the roadmap how you got to this, this point. And it needs to be broad enough to cover the whole paragraph, right? So if you're writing about a topic that is not in your topic sentence argument in your paragraph, then your topic sentence argument has failed to do its job. So it serves that purpose and it covers the whole paragraph. Next, I want to talk about a very important element that is important for history writing in particular. This is where we begin to put forth our evidence. How do we do that? And so a strategy that I encourage students to use is a sub-argument evidence analysis cluster with an argument that you make, again, that is going to be narrower than your topic sentence argument, and then that is going to clearly support that topic sentence argument. I encourage students to think about following that with evidence of some sort. This can be an anecdote, it can be a quote that you pull from the source, it can be an example that you're going to paraphrase from the article or the book or the primary source that you're reading that supports at least some argument. And it clearly all links back to the thesis statement and the overall topic of the essay. And then I encourage students to follow that with analysis, in which you really put forth how you interpret or analyze this source and what you've put forward, and how in doing so you're supporting the sub-argument. In other words, the reader doesn't get to sort of decide how or for not, and also how the evidence that you've given supports the argument. You are going to make that claim and make that clear for the reader, drive that point home. And then you end the paragraph with usually a very brief sentence of some sort that concludes the topic, brings it to a close, but it doesn't have to summarize, but it concludes it, and it also, if possible, sort of previews what's coming next, right, for the next paragraph. So these are sort of the basic building blocks of a good history essay. And as you'll see, the ones that have done this on Moodle have applied these principles. I want to just highlight a couple of things briefly here, a couple of tips that I think you can also use as you do this. When you are doing an essay in history, history is really an evidence-based kind of discipline, and so we're not talking about what we feel, although I like that sometimes students are able to incorporate that, and also other things from other classes and other fields, but the evidence is really key to our what we do here, and so when you do that, you need to really try and aim to have two sub-argument evidence analysis clusters, if possible. Not always possible, but that should be your goal. And then this equates to having essentially two pieces of evidence per paragraph. They can be different kinds of evidence, right? You could have a quote, and you can have maybe a story or an anecdote, like, or an example. There are different kinds of evidence that you can use. You could have an image that you're trying to analyze, and you would like to refer to that. There are ways to do this that are different, but two pieces of evidence that in the paragraph that really clearly support your sub-arguments in that paragraph, of which you should have two, and which also then support the topic sentence argument for the paragraph, and therefore the thesis. When you're looking at evidence, sometimes students, as they're writing, the night before the essay is due, they'll end up with evidence that comes from page 145 and 146 of the book. this doesn't serve your argument very well. It makes it appear that you have not engaged with the source fully, but also, you have this whole large range of pages to pull from, and that will make everything, stronger. But it also helps you to not make the same argument, twice in the paragraph, and have a different argument, I should say, sub-argument in the paragraph that will, therefore do a better job supporting your substance argument in your thesis statement. So, get some variety of sources and get them from other places in the text. I also encourage students to think carefully about, quotes. Sometimes students will just throw in a 2 or 3 line or even sometimes sentence quote to try and support their argument. This is not ideal. You really want to use the least amount of the quote necessary to support your argument. And this is your argument, right? So the quote cannot make the argument for you. You really need to make an argument in which the quote is only a small part of the process. So the longer your quotes are, the less space you have to make your argument in your paper as a whole. And a paper that has 2 or 3 of these big blocks of text, it really fails to get what you're trying to get across in your words. And sometimes students struggle with how to do this. So I've just given a couple of websites you can look at here. If you Google, inserting quotations into papers, you will see that these are some of the universal rules and advice to help you do so. And these kinds of sites also sometimes will give some other advice that may sort of correspond to what I've mentioned already. So as you work on essay 2, as you're working on essays in the future, think of these building blocks, right? And work on applying them. I think that you'll see that they can be quite effective, and they really allow you to express yourself while also be convincing and making arguments that work well together. And a good essay, you can look from the introductions, thesis, and roadmap down to some of the paragraph type of sense arguments, down to the conclusion, and really see continuity there, right? And continuity makes things so much easier to read. There are many other ways to write essays. I'm in France right now, and the French writing system is very different, and it's much more open, and it requires the reader to do a lot of work. But in the United States, our tradition of writing has evolved to one in which the onus of making writing clear is on the author, and we kind of don't leave a lot of space, right, for interpretation in academic writing. We make things very clear, and this is how we approach the writing task. So I'm trying to impart to you some of these skills and work on them with you. And so essay 2 will be looking for these skills applied. Please use this, this PowerPoint lecture, but also look carefully at the example I'm going to be putting up on Moodle. If you have a question about one of these kinds of examples or about the PowerPoint, please email me. I think that Devin's also available for questions. But these are I think some good tips that will be useful for you in the future. Best of luck, and thanks for your time.